In this lesson, we are starting the new chapter, which is chapter 15. Chapter 15 is control and coordination. So when you say coordination, in this chapter, we are talking about coordinating between receptor with coordinator and coordinator with the effector. So this is a continuation from the previous chapter, which is homeostasis. And then for control part, so the coordination will help us in the control. So for the control, I'm in this chapter going to learn about muscle contraction. So the control to lead to muscle contraction, and also the closure of the venous fly trap, okay, and also germination of seeds, right? So control and coordination. So in today's lesson, we're going to look at describe the structure and function of a sensory neuron and motor neuron, and state that intermediate neurons connect sensory neurons and motor neurons. So what you're going to learn in this lesson is an overview. You're going to learn about communication system, basically, right? So we know that the communication system in our body is either made of nervous system or endocrine system, or both will work together. And you're going to look at reflex arc, because using reflex arc, you're going to learn the 3 types of neurons that are involved in the reflex arc. So you're going to learn the structure and function of the 3 types of neurons. Okay, role of sensory receptor I teach you in a separate chapter, separate topic. Okay, so let's recap what you have learned about homeostasis before we move on from here, because this chapter is a continuation from the previous chapter. So you learn that homeostasis is the maintenance of constant internal environment at a set point or norm by controlling the input and output by itself. So you either control heat generation, you control blood glucose concentration. Okay, so by itself means it's self-regulating. Your body knows how to adjust by itself, despite changes in external environment. So the principle of homeostasis is actually carried out by stimulus response model, means how it works, okay, and by negative feedback mechanism. So what is the importance of homeostasis for us is it is important for survival, because homeostasis maintains a constant internal environment so that it is optimum for our cell to function. So when the cell can function normally, then the cell survive, then the organism will survive. Okay. So also because we do not need to depend on external environment, because we maintain a constant internal environment. So the cell are immersed in a constant internal environment, so it's able to function normally. So that will increase our independence away from the external environment, as well as the exploitable habitat. So there are more space that we can exploit and live in, because we can maintain a constant internal environment independent of external environment. Okay, so we also learned that the principle of homeostasis is based on this stimulus response model that you have learned in the previous chapter. So in this chapter, we are actually going to look at this part, the transmission part. Okay, under transmission part, you have looked at endocrine system, okay, using the example of regulation of blood glucose concentration. So you have learned about insulin and glucagon, okay, in regulating the blood glucose concentration. So this is an example for endocrine system, okay, in the transmission and coordination in our stimulus response model. So in this chapter, we are going to look at the nervous system in the coordination or in the transmission part of our stimulus response model. So the communication system in the body is needed for the transmission of signal. Signal means message, from a receptor to coordinator and coordinator to effector. So this is in order to give us a very rapid response to any internal and external stimuli, so that our cell can function normally, so that we can survive. Okay. So there are 2 communication systems in our body, which is nervous system and endocrine system. So we're going to focus on nervous system only. So nervous system is made up of neurons. So neurons can be spelled as N with NES or N with ONS. Without the E also can. Both are acceptable. So neuron stands for nerve cells or nerve fiber. Now the nerve cell is called nerve fiber because the cell is very long. Okay, it's very long because it's supposed to stretch from one place of your body to the other. For example, stretch from receptor, let's say the pain receptor on your finger, right? It must stretch all the way until your spinal cord at the backbone there, right? And then you can have nerve that stretch from the brain all the way down to your spinal cord, right? From spinal cord all the way down to your toes. So the cell is very, very long. So because it's very long, this thin, long part of the cell, which is a very thin, long cytoplasm, looks like a fiber. So therefore, it is also called the nerve fibers, which is actually referring to the nerve cell. Okay. So the group of nerve cells, right, arranged in a bundle, parallel to each other, arranged in a bundle to form the nerve. So when you say nerve, right, nerve is actually a tissue that is made up of many, many nerve cells or neurons that arrange in bundle. Okay, and all the nerve in our body will form our nervous system. So let's look at this one first. So when you say a nerve, what is a nerve? So in this diagram here, which is a drawing that represents the nerve, in one nerve, you can see that there are over here 3 bundles of nerve cells. So each bundle is made up of many neurons that are arranged parallel to one another. So the neuron can be the sensory neuron that send electrical impulse from your sense organ in your body, okay, to the central nervous system. Or it can be motor neuron that will send electrical impulse from your central nervous system to an effector. Okay, so sensory neuron are the neurons that will receive a stimuli and then will send the message from your sense organ to central nervous system. Whereas motor neuron is the neuron that will send message from your central nervous system to your effector, which can be muscles in any part of your body or glands. Motor is to do work. Sensory is to detect, your senses to detect stimulus. Okay, so we can have different neurons that arrange together in bundles. And the electrical impulse that they transmit can be moving in opposite directions. Right? Okay, so these are connective tissue around the nerve band, the neuron bundles of neurons. So connective tissues around the bundles of neuron. Everything will form, the whole thing will form the nerve. So this is the nerve. Okay. So next is we want to look at, so what is the function of the neurons? So we can classify the function neurons into three parts, okay? 3 parts. First, it is able to receive stimuli, okay, by modified receptor, which we'll look at later on. So this stimuli can come in all sorts. It can be electrical, okay, mechanical, as well as chemical. So a neuron can receive the stimuli in the form of electrical, mechanical, or chemical. Okay. Then after it receives the stimulus, it will carry out transduction. The word transduction stands for conversion of energy. So you convert energy from one form to the other. So you convert energy from the stimulus energy, right, which can be electrical, mechanical, or chemical, into the electrical energy to be transmitted as electrical impulse along the neuron. Okay, so then number 3 is electrical impulse transmission. So when I write impulse here, the impulse here stands for either nerve impulse or electrical impulse. So in short, impulse. Okay, it means nerve impulse or electrical impulse. So these are the 3 functions of a neuron. Number 1, receive stimuli. Number 2, transduction. After transduction, it created electrical impulse. Right? So number 3 is the transmission of the electrical impulse along the neuron. So this is a scanning electron micrograph of the bundles of neurons that are arranged parallel to one another. Okay. And then this one is a micrograph also of the neurons that are arranged parallel to one another, being sectioned in transverse section inside a nerve. So you've got one bundle, second bundle, third bundle of neurons. And then the neurons, right? This neuron is actually surrounded by, you see this fatty white color layer, which is called the myelin sheath. So all these are myelinated neuron. So this is another diagram to show you that all the transverse section of the neuron, right, is actually covered by dark circle, right, dark ring. So this dark ring is actually the myelin sheath as well. So they are myelinated neuron. So over here, I'm going to introduce to you how the nervous system can be studied. It is not in syllabus, but I think it's actually good for you to know, okay, as an introduction to the nervous system. So the nervous system in our body can be divided into the central nervous system, CNS for short. Central nervous system, you know, nervous system is made up of all the nerve, right? So all the nerve that runs from the brain and the spinal cord. So this, the brain and the spinal cord. So spinal cord is a nerve, right, that runs in our vertebra. Okay, so these two add up will form the central nervous system. So the brain and the spinal cord. Then from the central nervous system, we will have got a nerve that will be stretching outwards, right? So the nerve that stretch outwards to every part of our body is called the peripheral nervous system. It makes up the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral stands for going to the side. So that's why it's called peripheral nervous system. So the rest of them, so it can be from the brain to your chin, okay, to your eyes, the muscles at your eyes there, right? For you to control your movement of your eyes and also your eating, chewing, talking, okay, this is from the brain. Then it can be from your from the spinal cord to your hand, to your legs, and then to the muscles around our body, right? Okay, so those are peripheral nervous system. Now, peripheral nervous system can be further divided into sensory nervous system and motor nervous system. So just now I've briefly mentioned to you the differences between sensory and motor. So sensory nervous system is made up of sensory nerve. Sensory nerve is made up of sensory neurons, right? So those neurons will send electrical impulse from your sense organ to your central nervous system. Whereas motor nervous system is made up of motor nerve, and motor nerve is made of motor neurons. So motor neurons will be sending electrical impulse from your central nervous system, CNS, to the motor, which are the effectors, right? The effectors usually are the muscles, sometimes can be glands as well, okay? Now, for the type of work we are going to do in our body, right? We can further divide it into somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Okay, so sensory nervous system send the electrical impulse from the sense organ in the body to CNS. Motor nervous system will send electrical impulse from CNS to the body, means the effectors in the body. Now, somatic and autonomic, what does it mean? Now we know that the action that are carried out in the body, okay, the work that is done by the body, it can be voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary means you can control, right? You think you want to talk, you want to go somewhere, you want to walk to somewhere, to stretch out your hand to pick something, right? You can control one, right? You want to see something, so you turn your eyeball, right? So all these are voluntary action. So for voluntary action, your electrical impulse will be sent by the somatic nervous system. That means somatic, soma stands for body. Okay, soma. Soma stands for body. So it is sent by the somatic nervous system, right? But there are some actions in our body that are actually involuntary. That means we don't have to send a message. They will actually regulate by itself. For example, the rate of your heart beating. That means your cardiac muscles are as an effector. The rate of your breathing, the intercostal muscle, okay, and also the contraction of the smooth muscle in our digestive tract, right? So they're involuntary because you don't have to think and control it, man. So in order for those muscles to contract, we have to send electrical impulse. So these electrical impulse are sent through the nerve or the sensory neuron in the autonomic nervous system. Auto means automatic. You're not controlling it. So it will give rise to involuntary action in the body. So this is an overview of our nervous system, just for your interest only. Okay. One more thing. For the involuntary action, right, in the autonomic nervous system, autonomic is automatic. Okay. So automatically send electrical impulse depending on your need. It can be further divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Now, sympathetic nervous system is made of neuron that when you send a message, right, it will increase. That's why I put a positive. It will increase the metabolic rate, or it will increase the rate of contraction of the muscle. For example, increase your heart rate, increase your breathing rate. So this is like an accelerator in your car. When you send electrical impulse through this nervous system, it's going to accelerate your heart rate, okay, as well as your breathing rate and so on. Okay, sympathetic. Parasympathetic is negative here, means that it's like a brake. It's trying to slow down your breathing rate, your heart rate, okay, automatically, depending on your need. So when you exercise, you're supposed to increase your heart rate, right? So you use sympathetic nervous system. When you relax, after you exercise, you stop already, you have to use the parasympathetic nervous system, okay, to send the electrical impulse. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce to you the reflex arc. Okay, reflex arc, for you to learn the neurons that are involved in a reflex arc. Okay, now what is reflex arc? The word reflex stands for involuntary response that follows a stimulus. For example, the stimulus here is I take a hammer and I gently hit your knee. I very quickly but gently hit your knee. So the moment I hit on the right spot, the response is your leg will push upwards without you needing to think and do that. So this is called reflex, an involuntary response that follows a stimulus. Okay, and then of course this kind of stimulus and response, right, will involve the nerve cells to send the message, right? Okay, from the sense, from the sense organ, in this case here, maybe touch receptor. Okay, will pass through the sensory neuron and then all the way to motor neuron and then come back to the muscles. Muscles contract and then your leg will push upward or kick outwards, right? So the reflex arc is the simplest nerve pathway in which the stimulus produces a response without involving the brain. So you can see that from here, it goes to the spinal cord and then come back and then finish already. Okay, so we're using this for you to learn the neurons that are involved in reflex arc. So this is the simplest stimulus response model because it's complete, right? You have stimulus, got response. So the simplest stimulus response model. Okay, now it gives you a very quick response upon the stimulus. Okay, because it involves the shortest nerve pathway. So from here to the spinal cord and back to here without involving the brain. So the distance for electrical impulse to travel is very short. That's why the response will be very, very fast. Okay, because it only involves very few neurons. So very few neurons with very few synapses, very few junctions. So that's why it's very fast. So why must it be fast? Because this is inborn to protect our body from further injury. So that's why reflex is always a response that protects us from further injury. So example, knee jerk in this diagram. We also got other example, for example, removal of your hand from hot or sharp object. When you suddenly touch something that is very, very hot or very sharp, it's a very strong sensation. And at that time, you immediately release your hand one. You don't have to think one. Okay, so this is a reflex to protect us from further injury. Blinking of eyes when something is flying towards you, your eyes will automatically blink without you thinking that is it going to injure your eye. Okay, focusing is like you turn your eyeballs around, you start to see something. The focusing is done by the muscles in the eyes and you don't have to do it one. Okay, it's also by reflex. All these things are to protect us and also for our survival. Focusing is very important. Let's say, for example, for you to move now, but in the past for hunting, for example, for running away from danger, this is very important. Okay, so we're going to look at the 3 neurons that are involved in the reflex arc. Okay, so this is a finger and this is showing the tip of a neuron, right? So there are 3 neurons that be involved in a reflex arc. So let us look at them one by one. So now we got a pin where the finger accidentally touches the pin. So the tip of the nerve will receive this stimulus. So this stimulus is a mechanical stimulus, right? mechanical stimulus. So once it receives this stimulus, it's going to convert the energy of this stimulus into an electrical impulse, isn't it? By the process called transduction. So number one, you got the stimulus. Number two, transduction will happen, right? Transduction. So number three is transmission. Number three, transmission of the electrical impulse. So it will be transmitted along this neuron here, okay, all the way along the neuron. So this is the cell body of the neuron all the way and go into the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is the nerve that runs along our vertebrae, our backbone. So this is spinal cord. Okay, so it goes into spinal cord. So this is the first neuron, the sensory neuron. Okay, so it sends message from your body to the central nervous system, CNS. Then after that, the second neuron is called the intermediate neuron because it's a neuron between two different neurons. It connects between two different neurons, so it's interneuron. Okay, so interneuron, and the third neuron is the motor neuron. So motor neuron will send the electrical impulse from the central nervous system to your body, to the effector in your body. So like for example, the muscle. So your bicep muscle will contract to pull this bone, to pull your finger away from the pin. So this is the entire process of the reflex arc. Okay, how the electrical impulse is sent along the reflex arc. And this is the simplest stimulus response model in the body. Okay, so now we are going to learn more detail about the structure of the neuron. So this animation actually shows the movement of the electrical impulse, which is very fast, right? After stimulus and then response, very fast. And at the same time, when your knee is being hit by the hammer, right? You will be able to feel and know it is because this electrical impulse is also sent to the brain. So while it's being sent along here and go to interneuron, it will also be sent to the brain. So therefore, you will be able to know because your brain will interpret and tell you that, hey, something is hitting the kneecap, okay, because you can sense it there, right? Because the electrical impulse starts from here. Okay. So this diagram to show you another possible reflex, okay, where suddenly you accidentally put your hand on top of the fire and then suddenly you remove your hand because of the reflex arc. Okay. So now we look at the structure of the neuron. So there are three types of neurons. So there are three types of neurons, okay, that we have looked at just now in the reflex arc. So A, sensory neuron, B, intermediate neuron, which is also called relay neuron or connector neuron, because it connects between one neuron and another neuron. Okay, relay means to transfer the message. And also the C, motor neuron. So all these three neurons are represented by the diagram here. Now, it's very obvious when you look at the diagram, you can see the main difference between three of them is actually the location of the cell body. You see that? The location of cell body is very different. Cell body is the part of a cell which contains the nucleus. So this part here contains nucleus is called cell body, right? So the rest of the part are actually the very narrow cytoplasm, which form like a tube, okay? So let's look at the function of these three neurons first. So the function of the neuron is to conduct impulse, means the nerve impulse or the electrical impulse from for sensory neuron is from receptor to the spinal cord or CNS. Intermediate neuron is from sensory neuron to motor neuron inside the CNS, because the entire intermediate neuron is found inside the CNS. Motor neuron is from spinal cord or CNS to the effector. So these are the functions of the three neurons. Okay, So what's the difference between the structure of these three neurons? So they are different in terms of the location of the cell body with respect to the cell as well as with respect to the body. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this one in the following slides, the following few slides. Okay. So this is a structure of a sensory neuron. Okay, so a sensory neuron will begin with a receptor. So this is called a receptor, which is a separate cell in the sense organ. So it's a sense cell or sense organ, okay, which can detect the different kind of stimuli, for example, light, sound, taste, smell, touch, pain, heat, and so on. So this is a specialized receptor to detect that kind of stimulus. And then this is the tip of the neuron that's nearest to the sense cell or sense organ. So it's actually branched. So each of the line, okay, each of the branches, each of them is called a dendrite. So this one point to 2, so it's called dendrites. So dendrite is at the beginning end of the neuron, which receive stimulus. So dendrite. Then all the branches will fuse together to form a very long strand. So this long strand is actually the cytoplasm of the cell. So this is called axon. Followed by a cell body here, which contains the nucleus. So the cell body is slightly away from the center, or it can be slightly away from the center and tilting away from the axon. And then followed by axon again. Then it branches out again and end with little knob here at the junction with another neuron. So that's why these knobs are called the synaptic knob. That means knob that is located in the synapse. Synapse is the junction between two neurons. So it's called synaptic knob. Okay. So neurons may be myelinated or not myelinated. Myelinated means that it is covered by myelin sheath. So in this diagram, you can see that in the entire length of the axon, right, is actually covered by myelin sheath. And myelin sheath, right, is actually made up of cell called Schwann cell. That's why you can see nuclei, okay, all over. So each cell got one nucleus, okay. And then this white color region that wrap around the surface of the axon is called the myelin sheath, okay. And then myelin sheath will be covered by neurilemma. So it is a layer that covers the myelin sheath. So this layer, later on, you learn what is it made up of. Okay. So here, it describes the location of the cell body for sensory neuron. A, with respect to the cell, is located near the center of the cell, tilting outwards from the axon. And B is with respect to the body. So the cell body of the sensory neuron is actually located in the root ganglion, in the dorsal root ganglion. So what does it mean? So let us look at the next slide. Okay, before that. So this arrow, red arrow, shows the direction of nerve impulse transmission. It must always start from dendrite and ends at the synaptic knob, because the sense cell or sense organ is located here. So this is the beginning of the stimulus. All right. And this is the junction to the next neuron, which may be a relay neuron, which may be the brain, okay? So where is the dorsal root ganglion? So just now you saw the diagram, which is smaller diagram, to show you that. So you got a stimulus, right? You got a pin here, and then the finger touches the pin, correct? And then you got this sensory neuron that runs this way, isn't it? Okay. Sorry, I draw wrongly. Hang on. So the sensory neuron runs this way. So it runs here, right? This one here. Okay. And this is cell body, right? Almost slightly near to the center, and then the cell body is tilted away from the axon. Okay. Now, where is the dorsal root ganglion? So this is the dorsal root ganglion here. So this part, okay, is the dorsal root ganglion. So how to remember? Now, the spinal cord is right in the center here, right? This is spinal cord, right? Okay, spinal cord. Now, this spinal cord, right, has got extension, 4 extension outwards. 1 here, second one here, the third one is not drawn. So if it's drawn, the third one will be here. Okay, so it will be here, stretching outwards. And then the fourth one will be here, also stretching outwards. So they call this the roots, the root. So like the plant, right? At the bottom of the stem, it branches out into root. So they call this the root. Okay, and depending on the position of the root or the location of the root is called dorsal root ganglion or ventral roots. Okay, dorsal and ventral. So why dorsal and ventral is because if you already know for animal, right? So an animal that's four-legged, okay? So another leg there behind, okay? The tail, so the animal, okay? So the top part is actually called the dorsal, right? The back, okay, of the animal. And then the bottom, the base of the animal facing the ground is called the ventral. Right, so for us human, because we don't walk with four legs, we walk with two legs, so we actually walk standing straight up, right? So because of standing straight up, right, we call this part as our anterior and the behind part as the posterior, right? Right, the behind part is called the posterior. Yet our anterior can also be called the ventral. And then our posterior part can be called the dorsal as well. Okay, so that's why they label this part here the root, okay, that extend from our back. Okay, so imagine you've got the spinal cord here, right? So your spinal cord is here. Then you got an extension of the root towards this direction, another root here. So this is your spinal cord, okay, the spinal cord, right? They extend all the way to the brain. So this is a root that goes to the dorsal part, so it's dorsal root. This is a root that goes to ventral part, ventral root. So you've got dorsal root and ventral root. Okay. Now, what about ganglion? So dorsal root means this region here is the dorsal root, okay, of the spinal cord. Now, ganglion is actually a swollen region. A swollen region. So this region is swollen region of the dorsal root, which contain the cell bodies of the sensory neurons. So there are many cell bodies here because you know that all the neurons, the nerve cells are arranged in bundle, right? So therefore over here, they only draw one cell, but actually in a real life situation, there are many cell bodies here. So that's why this part is swollen. This dorsal root here is swollen. So that's why it's called dorsal root ganglion. So the cell body of the sensory neuron is located in the dorsal root ganglion with respect to our body. Okay, so that's dorsal root ganglion. So next part is we're going to look at the intermediate neuron or relay neuron. So the relay neuron is very similar to the sensory neuron in terms of the structure and labeling. Dendrite, axon, cell body, axon, dendrite. So cell body is located in the center of the cell with the same orientation as the axon. So it doesn't tilt to the away from axon, it's right in the center. Okay, then it ends with the synatic node. So this is direction of nerve impulse transmission from dendrite to the synatic node. Okay, so this diagram shows you these are the dendrites, and then one of them will be the axon. Okay, so this is a micrograph showing you the cell body of an intermediate neuron, and then got a lot of all these dendrites and axon. Okay, now this is motor neuron. Motor neuron, the structure is very similar to the rest of the sensory neuron and interneuron, except for what? Except for the location of the cell body. Okay, so it starts with the dendrite first because it's got a lot of these branches, right? At the start of the cell, it's dendrite, followed by cell body. And the cell body is located where? At the end of the cell. So this part and this part are called the ends, right? So it's at the end, one end of a cell. It's a cell body with respect to the cell. With respect to the body, it is located either in the brain. If you want to send a message from your brain to your body to do something, right? Of course, it's sent through the motor neuron. So this motor neuron will then start from your brain. Okay, but you're trying to send message, right? For in reflex arc, then it will start from your central nervous system. Central nervous system, yeah. It will start from your spinal cord. Okay, so therefore, the cell body of motor neuron can be located in your brain. It can also be located in your spinal cord. Now, bear in mind, when you use the word central nervous system, it means the brain plus your spinal cord. Right? So therefore, I think a more accurate answer should be either the brain or spinal cord. Either the brain or spinal cord. Or you write CNS. Brain and spinal cord or CNS. Okay? So the rest of the structures are similar, right? Okay, you also got this is myelinated neuron. So we have got Schwann cell, right? That wrap around the axon to form the myelin sheath. So let's look at how it wraps around. So this is Schwann cell. So you can see that the membrane, okay, the membrane of the Schwann cell actually wrap around the axon in concentric circles. So this whole layer of the layers of cell surface membrane will form the myelin sheath. Then right at the top right at the top here will be the layer called the neurilemma. So neurilemma is a sheath, or sorry, not a sheath. It is a layer that covers the myelin sheath. And this layer is made up of the cytoplasm of the cell as well as the outermost cell surface membrane. It also contains the nucleus. So this is the neurilemma. Okay, so what is the myelin sheath? Myelin sheath is a fatty insulating sheath. Fatty because made up of cell surface membrane, and cell surface membrane is made up of phospholipid bilayers. It's lipid, that's why it's fatty. So it's fatty insulating sheath formed from Schwann cell by wrapping its cell surface membrane round and round the nerve fibers in concentric layers. Okay, so the function of this myelin sheath is an electrical insulator because ions cannot pass through these layers of cell surface membrane. So therefore, it's electrical insulator. The main purpose is to increase the rate of impulse conduction by forcing the action potential to jump from node to node. So I'm going to explain this one in the subsequent lessons, but not for today. So this is a micrograph to show you these two are the myelinated neuron, and then this thick dark ring is actually the myelin sheath, and this part here is actually the cytoplasm of the Schwann cell, and this is the nucleus of the Schwann cell. Now, these cells here got no dark ring, right? So these are unmyelinated neurons. Okay, so they label here unmyelinated axon. So this is an electron micrograph showing you the layers of cell surface membrane, right, that arrange in concentric circles around the axon to form the myelin sheath. And here is the axon where you can see the mitochondrion inside the cytoplasm in the axon. So this is a diagram to show you the longitudinal section, to show you the axon with its organelle like mitochondrion. And then you got this is the Schwann cell, this is another Schwann cell. And this part here, which is the axon that is not covered with myelin sheath, is called the node of Ranvier. Okay, and this part here is called the neurilemma, which is made of cell surface membrane and the cytoplasm of the cell. So these two. Okay. So this is an electron micrograph showing you the node of Ranvier. So NR is node of Ranvier. Okay, where in this region the axon is totally not covered by myelin sheath. So therefore, this part can conduct the electrical impulse because ions can pass through the membrane here. Whereas the rest of the axon will be covered by myelin sheath, so it cannot conduct electrical impulse in this region of the axon, which is covered by myelin sheath. So this is another micrograph showing you the node of Ranvier here, right? This is thinner. The rest of the part are thicker. So these are the micrograph with nerve cells that are being stained, okay, to show you the structure of the nerve cells in the micrograph. So over here are explanation of the structures over here, okay? So this is a cell body and this axon. This is in the brain to show you that these are the neurons in the brain, okay? And then other than the neurons, these are tiny little nucleus which belongs to supportive cell. Sometimes we call them satellite cells that support our neurons, okay? So these are neurons. They're very easy to identify because apart from cell body, right, you've got a lot of like branching fibrous structure that extend out from the cell. So this is a neuron, typical structure of neuron. So this is a cell body and the axon, and there are a lot of the synaptic knot from another neuron that attaches to this neuron. Okay, so this one here are neurons that are found in the small ganglion. So you've got a group of cell body here. Okay, and this is a spread preparation where they spread out the tissue so that you can see individual neurons very clearly. Whereas the previous one, right, like this case here, this is a section, right? You cut through the tissue. So sometimes you may not be able to cut through the entire neuron. So you see only part of the neuron here. See, cell body and axon, and after that you cannot see axon anymore because this cell may be the axon may be going behind this dimension that you can see. Okay. Now this is to show you that this yellow color tube is actually the spinal cord, and the spinal cord runs in our backbone. Okay, this is our backbone vertebra, right? And it's protected by our vertebra. So it's very important. It must be protected because we need to send a lot of electrical impulse to and fro our sense organ and also our effector. So it must be very well protected for good coordination. So that's why we've got a vertebra to protect our spinal cord. And these are the roots that actually extend out from the spinal cord, right? Okay, so we've got the roots here. So this is a column, spinal cord is a column of nerves running along the back and sit in and protected by the vertebral column. So what you have learned today is you learn about communication system in our body, which is made up of nervous system and endocrine system. You have also looked at a reflex arc, okay, and then the structures of neurons that are involved in reflex arc, as well as their functions. So you've got sensory neuron, intermediate neuron, okay, intermediate neuron. Which is also called relay neuron, and finally is the motor neuron. So now we're going to look at an example past year question, which is an essay question. Okay, describe the structures of a sensory neuron and of a motor neuron and explain their roles in reflex arc. So when you are being asked to describe the structure, right, you can draw and label the structure, draw and annotate the structure, or you can just describe. So it's up to you, okay? So in the sensory neuron, it starts with the dendrite, right? So there are branches. At the end of the neuron is branched out. So each of the branch is called a dendrite. So you need to describe like this. But when you draw and label, then you don't have to describe. Okay, when you describe, you say that at one end of the neuron is branched out. Each branch is called a dendrite. Okay, and then the dendrite will come together to become the axon. Then it will be the cell body, which is located more towards the center of the cell. Okay, then the cell body are located in the dorsal root ganglion. So the function is to transmit electrical impulse from a receptor to CNS or the brain and spinal cord. See, CNS is made up of the brain and spinal cord. So either you write your answers CNS or brain and spinal cord. Okay, motor neuron have short dendrites, So motor neuron also start with, the end of motor neuron will start with branches, will branches out. Each branch is called a dendrite. You no longer learn dendron in your new syllabus. Okay, so we ignore the word dendron. So followed by very long axon, okay, and then the cell body is located at the beginning. I think for motor neuron, it starts with dendrite, followed by cell body, followed by very long axon. Okay, and the cell body is located in the brain or the spinal cord. So this is for reflex arc, is located at spinal cord. It's to transmit electrical impulse from CNS to an effector, which can be muscle or gland. Now, intermediate neuron function is to link sensory neuron to motor neuron, and is located in the central nervous system. So you can see the mark scheme, right? See this neuron spelling versus this neuron spelling, both are acceptable. Now let's look at what they reject. They reject if you write the word message. You cannot say that the neurons will transmit message, because message, right? When you learn the stimulus response model, message, it can be are transmitted in the form of electrical impulse in the nervous system, or it can be in the form of hormone, right, which is actually a chemical messenger. So therefore, when you write message, your answer is half correct, half wrong, right? Electrical impulse is correct, right? Whereas your hormone is actually wrong in this case. So therefore, cannot write message, except that means you can write impulses or action potential. Okay, so that's all for today's lesson about the nervous system, basically focusing on the structure and function of 3 neurons involved in reflex arc, which are the sensory neuron, the motor neuron, and the intermediate neuron. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you, everyone.